All right, guys, welcome to English to Recording over informational text. I am Mrs. Cager. In this recording, we'll go with your lessons for March 22nd, 2021. So before we get started, I want you to just think for a second and just think to yourself, do you have a strong understanding of what inferences are? If I were to ask you to define inferencing or an inference, would you be able to do that? And secondly, do you understand how to implement that? Do you understand how to make an inference? So take a few seconds to think about that, kind of where you fall in the spectrum there, and then that's what we're going to talk about today. Making inferences, what they are, and how to make them. You will see in your course announcements that I've posted a link to a podcast. I do want you to watch that podcast. It's a really good one that one of our other English 2 teachers created a couple of years ago about inferencing. So it's about 12 minutes long. It's posted in the video library, and it's also posted in the course announcements. It's also in your weekly email. So lots of places you can find. Take those 12 minutes to watch that podcast because it's really helpful in understanding what inferences are and how to make them. So we use deductive and inductive reasoning with informational text. So we're going to talk about what that means. This ties back to what we call figure 19b when we're talking about your TEKS or like the standards that you have to know for English 2. That's where this comes from. It's figure 19b, and it says that students will reflect on understanding to monitor comprehension, things like asking questions, summarizing and synthesizing, making connections, creating sensory images, and students will make complex inferences about text and use textual evidence to support their understanding. So throughout your lessons this week, you're going to practice making complex inferences. You will identify deductive and inductive reasoning, and then you'll use deductive and inductive reasoning to make inferences throughout your lessons this week. So some terms you need to be familiar with are cause and effect. That's a conclusion about why something happened. Predictions are conclusions about the future. Conclusions are a judgment or a statement about a person, place, thing, event, future prediction, or why something happened that is inferred or deduced from evidence. And lastly, generalization is a straightforward statement about a group, a place, a thing, or event that is supported by information. So what is informational text? That's what this whole front half of Unit 4 is about, informational text. So what is informational text? An informational text is a text whose primary purpose is to convey information about the natural and social world. These texts come in varieties of formats like books, handouts, magazines, CDs, the internet, what have you. All of these things can be informational text. The big misconception with informational text is that informational text and nonfiction text are the same thing, and that's false. Nonfiction is an account or a representation of a subject that is presented as fact. It may not actually be factual. It just has to be presented as fact. Informational texts clarify or explain things. Informational text can fit into nonfiction categories. Those might be brochures, textbooks, news articles, instructions, etc. They may fit into that nonfiction category, but not all nonfiction is informational. So keep that in mind. They're not the same thing. When we talk about making inferences and when that 19b standard is there, it says that students will make complex inferences. What does that mean? It means that we want to use inductive and deductive reasoning to create complex inferences. So inferencing, or reading between the lines, is the best guess after looking at textual clues and adding some background knowledge or experience. Then we draw a conclusion. We make an educated guess about what's going to happen. So inferences are these cause and effect, predictions, generalizations, or conclusions. In science, we use the term hypothesis when we make an educated guess about what's going to happen. We look at the information that we have and then we make an educated guess about what might happen next. So it's a similar concept in reading. We're making inferences, we're making an educated guess after we've looked at the text and we've applied our own background knowledge. We can make an educated guess as to where is this text going, what's going to happen next. That's making an inference. So I've used these two words, inductive and deductive, throughout this presentation. So let's talk about what that means. We want to use inductive reasoning, which means we draw conclusions and then we validate or support that conclusion with textual evidence. We draw a conclusion and then we say, this is why my conclusion is correct. And I can point to something in the text that says, this supports my conclusion. So my conclusion is made from this limited amount of information. It moves from specific to general. It kind of widens out, and that's inductive reasoning, right? We draw our conclusion, and then we find textual evidence. We kind of draw it out. Specific conclusion moves out to general. So here's some examples of inferences. A character in a story has a diaper in her hand. She has spit up on her shirt. She's got a bottle in a warmer on the counter. We can infer that that character is a mother, even if nowhere in the text, nowhere tells us, hey, this is a mom with a baby. We can look at the information we do have, and we can infer, we can reason that she is a mother. Okay, a second example. A character has a briefcase. He's taking a ride on an airplane and is late for a meeting. You can infer that this character is a business person. We're using context clues to draw a conclusion. A character uses words like stat and emergency and prep and operation. By that vocabulary, we can infer that this person works in the medical field. Okay? If a detective enters the house, which has been totally ransacked, he sees blood on the floor and this trail of blood leading out the back door. We can infer that a crime has occurred in that house. Nobody has to tell us that, but we can see all the evidence, we see all the details around us, and we can come to that conclusion. Lastly, if we enter a house and we see backpacks by the door, we see some small shoes scattered near those backpacks. We might see an art easel, a room with a dollhouse and a toy box. What might we infer about that? Well, we can infer that somebody in that house is a child, right? There are children in that family that live there because all the details around lead us to that conclusion, even if the text never explicitly states it. So that's what we're talking about with inferences. Now these examples are pretty straightforward. They're pretty simple. I wouldn't call these complex inferences, but it's the same process of looking at details, looking at things that are going on, and then making an educated guess, drawing a conclusion about what's going on in this story. So let's look at some more examples. These might be personal experiences. If you say, every time I eat shrimp, I get cramps. Therefore, I get cramps because I eat shrimp. I can make that inference. It's an educated guess. I can put those things together. Secondly, the woman in the neighboring apartment has a very shrill sounding voice. I hear a shrill voice from outside, so the woman in the neighboring apartment is probably outside shouting. I can put those things together without the text explicitly saying it. So, deductive reasoning. Let's talk about that. We talked about inductive, where we draw a conclusion and then we look to the text to support it. Inductive, we talked about going from specific to general. Okay, now deductive is kind of the opposite. So we want to validate or support conclusion and generalization with textual evidence, but deductive reasoning moves from this bigger general statement to specific events and situations. So deductive, we start out wider, broader, more general, and we become more specific. For example, all oranges are fruits. That's a big, wide, broad statement. Okay? All fruits grow on trees. True statement. A little more narrow, but still a pretty broad statement. Therefore, all oranges grow on trees. So see how that reasoning went from very broad, all oranges are fruits, all fruits grow on trees, therefore all oranges grow on trees. We move from really broad to really specific. So we go the opposite of inductive reasoning, where inductive goes from specific out to general, deductive goes from very general down to specific. So let's look at some more examples of deductive reasoning. All bachelors are single. Okay, broad general statement. All bachelors are single. Johnny is single. It's a little more specific, right? Therefore, Johnny is a bachelor. Now I've moved into a very specific deductive reasoning stance here. Okay, let's look at another one. You guys like me doing this thing with my hands? I feel like I have to do the hand thing. All planets revolve around the sun. Big general statement. The Earth is a planet, a little more specific. Therefore, the Earth revolves around the sun. So I went from all planets revolve around the sun. I know the Earth is a planet, therefore the Earth revolves around the sun. I went from very general, narrow it down to a more specific statement. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop there today because we got a lot more lessons to go through and kind of work this out before we get to your research paper. So one thing I want to tell you guys is don't get tripped up on the vocabulary in this unit. You're going to see a lot of words that sound really complicated and they're not. So don't get hung up on vocabulary. If you don't know what something means, just look it up or ask, okay? They're not really complicated words, but sometimes they sound complicated and then we kind of get in our heads and like, I don't know what that means. I can't do this. If you don't know something, look it up or ask, okay? So I'm going to leave you with this same question. I want you to think about, do you have a better understanding now of what inferences are and how to make them? If you feel like you're still a little lost, go back and review the lessons, go back and review this PowerPoint, and if all else fails, come and visit me during office hours or one-on-one times, guys. You can schedule those. They're in your course. There's a whole module about office hours and where to go and how to schedule that. So if this is stuff that's still tripping you up or you just feel like you don't quite get it, come see me. I've got office hours and one-on-one times all week, okay? If you've got questions, send me an email, send me a text, come into office hours, okay? You guys have a great week. I know you got a lot to do. Don't forget to watch that podcast about making inferences as well. It's super helpful. And I will see you guys in class on Tuesday.